Great to join this morning. So I'm Rupert Redesdale. I should start, I'm a Lib Dem Lord, and as a Lib Dem, having such a large captive audience is unusual, but rather good. I'm rather enjoying that. I promise not to use the B word today, because, well, it's just too much fun, isn't it? Referendum next year. But that's just a starter, just to get the blood racing. So I've got a number of hats on today. I am the CEO of the Energy Managers Association, so we have about 5,000 energy managers and go out to about 30,000 energy professionals, which is about 2/3 of the energy spend in the UK. And it's so really been focusing on the energy, but also water world. So Jacob and I set up a water retail company, which we almost regret, but it's great fun. So been focusing a lot on water as well. But really what I've been asked to do this morning is focus on the higher level of climate change. I did some fabulous slides, but they said, no, you don't want to use slides like that. So I'm just going to have to wing it, which I usually do anyway. I never really stick to the slides. But I had this fabulous first slide, and I thought it was great. I thought, that's the one to kick off, which was just a drain in the street flooding with water. Because to me, that's the epitome of climate change, okay, and the problem we're facing. So let's just give the impression climate change is a given. And I do love the way that, we don't have to have that argument anymore. I set up the all-party climate change group 20 odd years ago. And at that time, we were arguing whether climate change actually existed. Now, you don't even have that. I remember a few years back talking to a banker. I said, well, I'm doing stuff on climate change. He said, oh, climate change doesn't exist. And then he said, and I said, oh, I'm doing some work on flooding. He said, with a company. He said, oh, you make a fortune. Climate change is going to flood everything. And there's this difference in people's view of, people get climate change. People get that it is a big serious. People don't get that they've got to do something about it. Because you would not be taking a plane on holiday if you did. And that's why the disconnect in people saying, I do get it, but I don't want to do anything about it. But going back to the drain is a fantastic indicator. It's much better than a polar bear. I do love the polar bears on the icebergs. I mean, the solid thing's drowned by now or whatever. I mean, the iceberg's melted. That sort of picture is not the one you really need to be looking at. The flooding drain is what you need to be looking at. And the reason is because there's two issues there. First is rainfall patterns have changed. We are going to get, on all the modelling, we are going to get wetter summers and drier winters. And the last 3 winters have been very dry. We're entering into a drought period because the aquifers aren't filling from the rain. I mean, it's not as bad just at the moment, but it is a long-term trend coming. And when we do get the rain, it just dumps a whole month straight on your head in about 2-3 hours. This is where the drain comes in, and this is where the scale of the problem is what people aren't getting their head round. So the specification for drains by the councils was set in the 1950s, around 1950s rainfall, and haven't changed. So the problem you have is you have now climate change rainfall falling, massive amounts of water trying to go through drains which weren't designed for that. That's fine, you say, let's just dig up the drains. Can you imagine how much it's going to cost to dig up tens of thousands of miles of drain and upgrade them? It is a real problem we're facing. There was some big flooding in Hull, which was a real indicator of where we're going, because Hull, the actual bits that flooded were on top of a hill. And the reason it flooded is because the drains just couldn't deal with the amount of water. So even though it was on the top of a hill, it was backing up. And you're going to see that a lot more. So flip side of climate change is drought and flooding. Everybody goes, that's fine. I was working in DEFRA as part of the coalition for a very short stint, because I don't tend to toe the party line, so they tend to kick me out of any jobs that could be at all controversial. We had a slight problem because we had to declare a drought, and then we had the wettest drought ever, if anybody remembers that. So day the drought is declared, it didn't stop raining for a long period of time. And everybody says that's fine and laughed about the drought. The problem was, the figures were that if at the point that the drought was declared, to get back to normal, we needed 200% of normal rainfall. Which is quite an ask. The day the drought is declared, in that period that the rainfall fell, we had 220% of normal rainfall. Everybody goes, oh, well, that's fine. Imagine if we'd had normal rainfall and then we had 220% normal rainfall on top of that. You know, then you're looking at floods, which we will see. We will see them a lot more. And of course, we're building on floodplains, we're building in areas we shouldn't be building. That's an issue. And if you look at the problem we're facing, is that in 10 to 15 years' time, there won't be a part of the country which is not stressed for water. You know, that, we don't think it's going to come, but 10 to 15 years' time, where were you 15 years ago? And you say, right, 15 years, it's not a long period of time. Well, you know, when you get to an age, 15 years just seems like, oh, nothing. But the problem you've got there is, if you look at Thames' projection for the amount of water they will be using and the amount of water that will be available, they don't match. There is going to be a big shortfall. And this is just really not percolating down. It's great with water, you just use all the water references without meaning to. So it's really not getting to people how they're actually going to deal with this. And just an indicator of that is we actually use more water individually than we did 10 years ago. So whilst we're getting less and less water available, we're using more and more. And even with water efficiency devices, people are just wasting water. We really haven't got it into our heads. This is part of the climate change story. Now, the great thing is that people are now waking up to climate change. You know, Extinction Rebellion, I love them. It's great fun. They keep all the traffic off the road, so between my office in Vauxhall and Westminster, straight through on the bicycle, no problem at all. It's brilliant. You can stop off and watch people being arrested. It's fun. But I'm really, a lot of people are against them. I'm really supporting, they've kept it in the news in a period you wouldn't expect it to be for a few weeks, and it shows just the level of people's commitment to this. You know, and there is a moral shift. Younger people take this far more seriously because they're going to have to. But the problem is now coming is that everybody says, okay, we've got a climate emergency, we've got this, and what we're going to do is declare a climate emergency. So you then say, okay, as a company or as a council, 38 councils around the country have declared a climate emergency. That's very easy to do. What do you do then? That's the problem, because the government set out a strategy, net zero, to get to net zero by 2050. It is a fantastic document and well worth a read. The trouble is some of the big wins in reducing carbon are with technology that doesn't exist at the moment. Carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, which I don't think is ever going to get commercial. A number of areas where we're just not going to get there unless we change the entire infrastructure. And that's, 2050 is not a long period if you're looking at changing everything you're doing. I mean, there are things I think we will achieve. So the road to zero, which is the government's policy on electrifying the fleet, that probably will take place. But everything has its problems. At the moment, everybody's worrying about, if you have an electric car, which I do, Renault Zoe, fantastic, great car. Everybody's worried about charging points, but they're coming in. Nobody's quite realized that there is massive stress on the electricity grid at the moment. We've got enough power, but not at the right times. So if everybody electrifies, we will not have enough power on the grid to keep the grid from falling over. We're going to have to build into the systems, upgrade the systems, change the systems so we can actually use that. I mean, an electric vehicle uses the same amount of electricity as a household in a year. It's not a small amount. So if you think about it, if we're moving to 2030, where a third of our fleet is going to be sold electric vehicles, so it might be about 30–40%. So that's the equivalent of 10 million new homes, electricity supply. It's not a small ask. You know, but people aren't looking at the consequences of this. People are starting to get their heads around, I want an electric car, I want a charging point. They're not really looking at how that's going to affect the wider system and how much is actually going to change to make this happen. On the bright side, you know, people, the companies are getting it to a degree. But then they've really got to get their head around what are they going to do to actually combat climate change. Okay? And it's going to have to be a holistic approach if you're to make the big savings. Energy efficiency is the big one which people should go for. So I'm writing a paper with our energy managers about how to get the first 10-20%. And you could do that reasonably quickly, focusing on HVAC, on pumps, motors, efficiency in those sort of areas. But it also, we have a ratio in the energy managers which is 40-20-40. So we look at energy efficiency as 40% technology, 20% control systems, and 40% behavior change. And the really big behavior change that companies have got to do is start writing policies around climate change. And this is the bit that I think is going to have the biggest effect. Once policies start realizing they actually have to write a policy that they have to deliver on, and they will be looking at how they deliver on that, then that will start change the way they're actually looking at it and how they finance it. So it's not just energy, it's going to be water, and it's not just water, it's going to be behavior change across the board. To meet some of our targets, we're going to actually have to make companies, have to make our employees eat less meat. You know, to me, that's, you know, I love a bacon sandwich followed by a sausage sandwich, solid an egg sandwich. I really enjoyed this morning's breakfast, I have to admit. But we're going to have to do that. But what I love is some of these trends are already taking place. So when the Climate Change Committee started writing its report, they said this many people have to move towards eating less meat. In the period from when they started formulating the report to the period they actually stopped changing the report, society had actually moved beyond the original targets they were setting. So there is a movement in society. Transport is completely changing. So 10 years ago, now a quarter of less driving tests have been taken than 10 years ago. Younger people can't afford cars in town, and they're also not looking at owning a vehicle. It's really scaring the hell out of a lot of the car companies, because the idea of everybody owning a car is disappearing. And I think that's going to change as a societal move. Some of the things we take as given now will not be the way society looks at in the future. There is one final thing which I think is rather good, is that the government has come up with one of the most innovative green policies ever, and that's going to affect every large company and the way they actually do business. And that is, they introduced, Osborne said, let's get rid of all this green crap. So he wanted all the different taxes taken out. So he simplified them into one taxation regime, which came in April. But linked to this is a new report called the Simplified Energy and Carbon Report, SECRA. It doesn't roll off the tongue. 10,000 of the largest companies will have to do this report every year. The report, and it has to be in their, go in front of their accountants and in their company report. That report will be a public document. It will have to look at the energy you use, the carbon you use, the intensity metric that your company is dealing with, and you can pick your own, the methodology you've used, but also you have to state in a public document the principal energy efficiency measures you've taken, and you have to state if you haven't done any. And I think that's going to be a really interesting document that then has to be lodged with companies' hats. You can't sign off your accounts until you've done it as a large company. Most companies don't even know it's coming. But that's going to have a massive effect, because what I like is it's a really comprehensive document that does all the bits and pieces, and I know because I wrote most of it, through Treasury, through DEC, and through BEIS, as they didn't know I was doing it. I just wrote the reports, gave it to the civil servants who didn't know what they're doing, and they just wrote it into government policy. That's the way to deal with politics, is not go and actually talk to the politicians, they know nothing. go originally to the civil servants and try and educate them a bit more. That document, the real kicker with that is not that you can't sign off your report until you've actually put it in. It has to be signed off by your board. So everybody in the company is going to have to start thinking about that. But I think what's really interesting is I started talking to the finance houses. Finance is now starting to look at climate change as one of the biggest risk factors that faces any company going forward. They will start using this report on the financial viability of companies. And I think that will have a real effect within 2-3 years' time as these start coming out on a regular basis. Financiers are going to start looking at companies and say, are you financially viable and are you climate change viable? And I think that's going to have an effect. So there are some good things coming down the line. I'm really hopeful about how society will change. Society does change unbelievably. And within 10-15 years, things we do now will change. I mean, I really find it, a couple of societal changes that happened in my lifetime is a few years, 10-15 years ago, 20 years ago, if you were caught drink driving, then the act of being caught was the bit that was seen as wrong. You were caught. Now, younger people seeing drink driving as is a moral effect. You shouldn't drink drive in the first place. Those sort of things are going to come across. As people see climate change becoming more and more of an issue, people are going to start seeing this as something they've got to do, and they will actually physically do. Just coming back to water, water is going to be one of the real key points, because it's going to become an issue for people. You know, people take water as a human right. We can't use water the way we're using it in this country with climate change, because we won't have enough, and we're going to have to change entirely how we look at water. And I'm really looking forward to the fact that in 5-10 years' time, you know, when some of your kids are getting through to that age, that's the thing they're going to see as morally wrong. Somebody leaving a tap on for the wrong reason. And I think that's when we're really going to start making progress in tackling climate change. Thank you.